The violent crack of thunder roared across the darkened sky as Tabitha Grayson pushed her horse to its limits, racing against both the encroaching storm and the men who pursued her. Fort Stanton, New Mexico Territory, 1878. Her destination lay just beyond the old wooden bridge that spanned the usually calm Bonito River. But tonight, the river was anything but calm. Rain hammered down in icy sheets, soaking Tabitha to the bone as she clutched the leather satchel containing the documents that would save her father's ranch. The loan papers were safely sealed inside, signed by the bank in Santa Fe, and worth more than gold to her family. Lightning flashed, illuminating the swollen river ahead and the wooden bridge now partially submerged under rushing water. "There's nowhere to run, Miss Grayson." The voice of Victor Harlow, her father's rival rancher, called out from behind her. "Those papers won't save your worthless patch of dirt." Tabitha urged her exhausted mare forward. The animal balked at the edge of the bridge, sensing danger in the violently churning waters. The river had risen well above its banks, and the current smashed against the wooden supports with frightening force. "Please," she begged her horse, patting its drenched neck. "Just a little farther." With a nervous whinny, the mare took tentative steps onto the bridge. Tabitha could hear Harlow and his men approaching from behind. The bridge creaked and groaned beneath her, planks shifting precariously with each step. Halfway across, a terrible cracking sound split the air. The mare reared in panic as a section of the bridge splintered away. Tabitha felt herself being thrown, the world spinning as she tumbled toward the raging water. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the leather satchel slipping from her grasp, disappearing into the churning flood. Xavier Vaughn had been tracking a small herd of cattle that had broken free during the storm when he heard the commotion at the river. Reining his stallion to a halt atop the bluff overlooking the Bonito, he witnessed the bridge's partial collapse and the woman being thrown from her horse. Without hesitation, he spurred his horse down the slope, eyes fixed on the spot where she had disappeared. On the opposite bank, he could make out the silhouettes of riders backing away from the destroyed bridge. There was no time to wonder about them. The woman would be swept downstream in moments. Xavier dismounted at the river's edge, removing his gun belt and heavy coat. The water was freezing as he waded in, fighting against the powerful current. Years of breaking wild horses had given him strength, but the river fought him like a living thing. He spotted her downstream, her pale blue dress billowing in the water like a ghostly apparition. With powerful strokes, he swam toward her, reaching her just as she was about to be pulled into a tangle of submerged tree branches. Grabbing her around the waist, Xavier kicked hard against the current, angling them toward the shore. His lungs burned with the effort, but he maintained his grip on the unconscious woman, finally feeling the riverbed beneath his boots as they neared the bank. Dragging her onto solid ground, Xavier quickly checked for breathing. Relief washed over him when he felt the faint rise and fall of her chest. She was alive, but deathly pale and cold to the touch. As he lifted her into his arms, her eyelids fluttered momentarily before closing again. Xavier cradled her against his chest, providing what little warmth he could. "You're safe now, madam," he said softly, though he doubted she could hear him. "I've got you." His horse waited patiently nearby. With careful movements, Xavier lifted her onto the saddle before mounting behind her, keeping her secure against his chest. Fort Stanton was still several miles away, but his cabin was much closer. With the bridge gone and night falling fast, it was the only sensible option. Xavier urged his horse forward, feeling the woman shiver violently against him. "Hold on," he whispered. "Just hold on." The storm continued its assault as they made their way through the dense pine forest. Xavier's cabin appeared through the trees, a modest structure he had built with his own hands 3 years ago after leaving Texas behind. It wasn't much, but it had sturdy walls, a solid roof, and a fireplace that would provide the warmth the woman desperately needed. Inside, Xavier quickly laid her on his bed and built up the fire from the banked coals. Once flames were leaping in the hearth, he turned his attention back to his unexpected guest. She remained unconscious, her wet clothing sapping what little body heat she had left. "Madam," he said loudly, touching her shoulder. "Madam, can you hear me?" When no response came, Xavier faced a difficult decision. She would develop fever or worse if she remained in her drenched clothing, but he was reluctant to overstep boundaries. In the end, necessity won out. As respectfully as possible, he removed her outer garments, covering her immediately with several thick blankets before hanging her dress and petticoats near the fire to dry. Only when she was settled did Xavier attend to himself, changing into dry clothing and preparing a pot of coffee. As it brewed, he rummaged through his small collection of medicines, finding willow bark for fever and a bottle of whiskey that served as a remedy for almost everything else on the frontier. The woman stirred as Xavier placed a cool cloth on her forehead. Her eyes opened briefly, striking green that reminded him of spring meadows before closing again. He sat beside the bed, keeping vigilant watch as the storm raged outside. It was nearly midnight when she truly awakened, sitting up with a startled gasp. "The papers!" she cried, attempting to rise from the bed before realizing her state of undress beneath the blankets. Her eyes widened as she clutched the covers to her chest, staring at Xavier with a mixture of confusion and alarm. "Easy now," Xavier said, keeping his distance to avoid frightening her further. "You nearly drowned. The bridge collapsed during the storm." "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice hoarse. "And where are my clothes?" "Xavier Vaughn, madam. Your clothes are drying by the fire. I had to remove them. You were freezing." He gestured to where her dress hung near the hearth. "I assure you, I acted only out of necessity." The woman's gaze darted around the cabin, taking in her surroundings before returning to Xavier's face. Something in her expression shifted as she studied him, his honest blue eyes, the worried set of his mouth. "Tabitha Grayson," she offered finally. "Thank you for saving me, Mr. Vaughn. Call me Xavier, please." He poured a cup of coffee and carefully approached the bed. "This might help warm you from the inside." I added a touch of honey. Tabitha accepted the cup with trembling hands. "The men who were chasing me, did you see them?" "There were riders on the other side of the river, but they turned back after the bridge collapsed." Xavier pulled a chair closer to the bed. "Why were they after you, Miss Grayson? If you don't mind my asking." Tabitha's face fell as she remembered the satchel. "I was carrying loan papers from Santa Fe, documents that would save my father's ranch. Victor Harlow has been trying to take our land for years, and now—" Her voice broke. "Without those papers, we'll lose everything within the week." Xavier frowned. "Harlow? I've heard that name. He's been buying up all the small ranches around here, and running out those who won't sell." Tabitha added bitterly. "My father's the last holdout in the valley. He sent me to Santa Fe because Harlow's men have been watching the roads. I almost made it home." Her hands tightened around the coffee cup. Now it was all for nothing. "Maybe not," Xavier said thoughtfully. "How much time do you have before the bank forecloses?" 5 days, but without proof of the loan extension." She shook her head. "It might as well be 5 minutes." Xavier stood and moved to tend the fire. "First light, I'll take you to Fort Stanton. From there, we can send a telegraph to the bank in Santa Fe. They can confirm the loan agreement." "You would do that for me?" Tabitha asked, surprise evident in her voice. "You don't even know me." Xavier turned back to her, his expression serious. "Out here, we help each other. It's the only way to survive." He offered a small smile. "Besides, I couldn't very well leave you to drown, could I?" For the first time since waking, Tabitha returned his smile. "I suppose not. Thank you, Xavier. Truly. Try to rest, Miss Grayson. Morning will be here before you know it." "Tabitha," she corrected softly. "If I'm to call you Xavier, then you must call me Tabitha." Xavier nodded, feeling an unexpected warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. "Tabitha it is. Rest now. I'll keep watch." And watch he did, through the long hours of the night as the storm gradually dissipated and Tabitha slept fitfully, occasionally calling out in her sleep about the papers and her father. Xavier found himself studying her features in the firelight, the determination evident even in repose, the strength that had driven her to make such a dangerous journey alone. By dawn, the rain had stopped, though dark clouds still lingered on the horizon. Tabitha's clothes had dried, and Xavier discreetly stepped outside to give her privacy to dress. When he returned with freshly gathered eggs from the small coop behind his cabin, she was standing by the fire, her hair combed but still damp around her shoulders. "Your mare ran off when the bridge collapsed," Xavier said as he prepared a simple breakfast. But my horse is strong enough to carry us both to Fort Stanton. Tabitha nodded, accepting the plate he offered. I keep thinking about those papers. They must have been swept downstream. The river winds for miles through the territory, Xavier acknowledged. But when the water recedes, there's a chance they could be found. A very small chance, Tabitha said, her voice betraying her lack of hope. They ate quickly, and within the hour were mounted on Xavier's stallion, heading toward Fort Stanton. Tabitha sat in front of Xavier, acutely aware of his arms around her as he held the reins. The storm had left the trail muddy and treacherous, forcing them to travel slowly. "Tell me about your ranch," Xavier said as they rode, partly to distract Tabitha from her worries and partly because he found himself genuinely curious about her life. "It's not grand," Tabitha replied, "but it's been in my family for 2 generations. My grandfather came west after the war with Mexico and built it from nothing. My mother died when I was young, so it's just been my father and me these past 15 years. No brothers or sisters to help with the work. No, which is why Harlow thinks we'll be easy to push out. 2 people can't defend a ranch the size of ours." She glanced back at him. "What about you? You live alone in that cabin." Xavier nodded. "I came from Texas 3 years ago. Needed a fresh start." "Running from something?" Tabitha asked perceptively. Xavier was silent for a moment. "Not running. Just leaving behind things that couldn't be fixed." Tabitha seemed to understand his reluctance to elaborate. "Well, I'm grateful you were there yesterday. Whatever brought you to New Mexico?" They arrived at Fort Stanton by midday. The military post was bustling with activity, soldiers drilling in the parade ground, while supply wagons came and went through the main gate. Xavier helped Tabitha dismount outside the telegraph office, his hands lingering at her waist perhaps a moment longer than necessary. The telegraph operator, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, listened to Tabitha's story with skepticism. "Without the original papers, miss, there's not much that can be done. I can send your message, but banks are particular about documentation." "Please," Tabitha insisted. "Just explain the situation. Ask them to send confirmation of the loan extension." The operator shrugged and began tapping out the message. "It'll be several hours before we get a reply, if they respond today at all." "We'll wait," Xavier said firmly, guiding Tabitha to a bench outside the office. They spent the afternoon at the fort's small general store, where Xavier insisted on purchasing a new shawl for Tabitha to replace the one lost in the river. As they browsed the limited selection of goods, Xavier noticed a group of men entering the fort, Victor Harlow among them, unmistakable with his expensive Eastern suit and silver-handled walking stick. "Tabitha," Xavier said quietly, guiding her behind a display of canned goods. "Harlow just rode in with 3 men. Tabitha paled. "He must be looking for me. If he finds out I've contacted the bank." "He won't," Xavier assured her. "Stay here." Xavier approached the store owner, speaking in low tones before slipping him a coin. The man nodded and led them through a back door that opened onto a narrow alley between buildings. "My friend has a room above the stable," the shopkeeper explained. "You can wait there until your business is concluded." The stable's loft was dusty but private, with a small window overlooking the fort's main thoroughfare. From this vantage point, they could see Harlow speaking with a cavalry officer, gesturing emphatically. "He's looking for me," Tabitha whispered. "Probably claiming I stole something from him to justify the chase." Xavier's jaw tightened. Men like Harlow think they own everything and everyone. "I've seen his type before." "In Texas?" Tabitha asked. Xavier nodded slowly. "My family had a small ranch near Austin. A man named Blackwell wanted to run a railroad through our property. When my father refused to sell, there was an accident. Barn fire. My parents didn't make it out." Tabitha's hand found his, squeezing gently. "I'm so sorry, Xavier. I tried to prove Blackwell was behind it, but he owned the sheriff, the judge, everyone who mattered." Xavier's voice grew distant. "One night, I confronted him. Things got heated. I didn't kill him, but I came close. Close enough that I couldn't stay in Texas anymore." "So you came here to start over," Tabitha said softly. "I thought I could outrun the bitterness," Xavier admitted. "But seeing Harlow down there, knowing what he's trying to do to your family, it brings it all back." Tabitha's green eyes studied his face. "We're quite a pair, aren't we? Both fighting battles against men with too much power and too little conscience." Hours passed as they waited in the loft, talking in hushed voices about their lives, their hopes, their disappointments. Xavier found himself captivated by Tabitha's determination, her unwavering loyalty to her father and their land. She, in turn, was drawn to his quiet strength and the sense of justice that still burned within him despite his past. Late afternoon brought a knock on the stable door. The telegraph operator peered up into the loft. "Miss Grayson? There's a reply from Santa Fe." They hurried back to the telegraph office, careful to avoid the main street where Harlow might still be lurking. The operator handed Tabitha the transcribed message, watching curiously as she read it. "They've confirmed the loan extension," she said, relief flooding her voice. "And they're sending a letter of verification by the next mail coach. It should arrive within 3 days before our deadline." Xavier felt a genuine smile spread across his face, the first in longer than he could remember. "That's wonderful news. But I still need to get home," Tabitha said, her practical nature reasserting itself. "The river crossing is destroyed, and Harlow is still looking for me." "There's another way," Xavier suggested. "A longer trail through the mountains. It would add a day to the journey, but it would keep us away from Harlow's men." Tabitha didn't miss his use of us rather than you. "You would come with me? All the way to my father's ranch." "I said I'd help you," Xavier replied simply. "I intend to see this through." They departed Fort Stanton at dusk, having purchased supplies and a second horse for Tabitha. The mountain trail was arduous, winding through pine forests and rocky passes far above the river valley. They made camp the first night in a small clearing, building a fire that was shielded from view by the surrounding trees. As they sat beside the flames, sharing a simple meal of beans and hardtack, Tabitha found herself studying Xavier's profile, the firelight highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the thoughtful set of his blue eyes. "Why are you really helping me?" she asked suddenly. "Is it just because of what happened to your family? Because you see Harlow as another Blackwell?" Xavier considered her question, poking at the fire with a stick. "That was part of it, at first," he admitted. "But now—" He looked up, meeting her gaze. "Now I'm helping because I want to. Because I've come to care about what happens to you, Tabitha." The admission hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Tabitha felt her heart quicken, aware that something significant had shifted between them in the span of those few words. "I care about you too," she said softly. "I never expected to find someone like you when that bridge collapsed." Xavier moved to sit beside her, tentatively taking her hand in his. "When I pulled you from that river, I had no idea you'd end up saving me too." "Saving you?" Tabitha asked, confused. "From the loneliness. From becoming the bitter, isolated man I was turning into." His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "You've reminded me there are still things worth fighting for." In the quiet of the mountain night, surrounded by the vast wilderness of the New Mexico territory, Tabitha leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a tender kiss that spoke of newfound hope and possibilities neither had dared imagine just days before. The journey to the Grayson Ranch took another 2 days, during which their bond deepened through shared hardships and quiet conversations beneath star-filled skies. When they finally crested the hill overlooking the valley where Tabitha had grown up, she felt a rush of emotion at the sight of the modest ranch house and surrounding pastures. "It's beautiful," Xavier said sincerely, taking in the patchwork of fields and the cattle grazing in the distance. "It's home," Tabitha replied simply. "Come on. My father will be worried sick." Thomas Grayson was indeed beside himself with concern, having heard about the bridge collapse and fearing the worst when his daughter failed to return. The sight of Tabitha riding into the yard brought the weathered rancher to tears as he embraced her tightly. "I thought I'd lost you, child," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You nearly did," Tabitha admitted, explaining all that had transpired. "If not for Xavier, I wouldn't be standing here now." Thomas turned to Xavier, extending a calloused hand. "I'm in your debt, Mr. Vaughn. Anything I have is yours for the asking." Xavier clasped the offered hand. "Your daughter's safe return is reward enough, sir." The arrival of the mail coach 3 days later brought the promised verification letter from the Santa Fe Bank. Thomas Grayson proudly presented it to the local bank manager in town, effectively ending Harlow's immediate threat to their land. But Harlow was not a man to accept defeat graciously. Word reached the Grayson ranch that he was gathering men, planning to force them off their land regardless of legal protections. "We need to prepare," Xavier advised, having extended his stay at Tabitha's insistence. "Harlow won't give up just because the law is on your side." Thomas nodded grimly. "We have friends in the valley. Not many, but enough who've suffered under Harlow's tactics that they might stand with us." Over the next week, Xavier helped fortify the ranch house, while Tabitha rode to neighboring homesteads, rallying support. Several families agreed to help, bringing the defending force to nearly 20 men still outnumbered by Harlow's hired guns, but determined nonetheless. Xavier found Tabitha on the porch one evening, staring out at the sunset painting the valley in hues of gold and crimson. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, coming to stand beside her. "It's worth fighting for," she replied, leaning slightly against him. "I've been thinking, Xavier. When this is over, what then? Will you return to your cabin?" Xavier turned to face her fully. "I've grown rather fond of this valley," he said carefully, "and even more fond of certain people in it." Tabitha smiled, her eyes reflecting the sunset's glow. "I was hoping you might say that." Their moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching riders. Thomas Grayson emerged from the house, rifle in hand, but relaxed when he recognized the lead horseman as Sheriff Morgan from the town. "Thomas," the sheriff called as he dismounted. "Thought you should know Harlow's been arrested." "Arrested?" Thomas echoed in disbelief. "On what charge?" "Attempted murder, for starters," Morgan replied. "Seems one of his men got tired of doing his dirty work and came forward. Confessed to being ordered to cause the bridge collapse, specifically when your daughter was crossing." Tabitha gasped, remembering the terrifying moment when the structure had given way beneath her horse. "There's more," the sheriff continued. "The man also admitted to setting fire to the Peterson place last year and running the Wilsons off their land. Federal marshals taking Harlow to Santa Fe for trial tomorrow." The news spread quickly throughout the valley. With Harlow in custody and his operation exposed, his remaining men scattered, unwilling to face similar charges. For the first time in years, the small ranchers and farmers of the region could breathe freely, no longer living under the shadow of Harlow's intimidation. In the weeks that followed, Xavier became a fixture at the Grayson Ranch, helping with the spring roundup and repairs neglected during the conflict with Harlow. His cabin stood empty, though he occasionally rode back to check on it and tend to his small garden. One warm evening in June, Xavier asked Tabitha to ride with him to a hillside overlooking both their properties. There, as the setting sun gilded the landscape, he took her hands in his. "I came to New Mexico looking for solitude," he said. "What I found instead was you. These past months have shown me what I was really missing, not just company, but connection, purpose, love." Tabitha's eyes widened as Xavier lowered himself to one knee, holding up a simple gold band. "Tabitha Grayson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of building a life together that combines your ranch and my little homestead into something greater than either could be alone." Tears of joy sprang to Tabitha's eyes as she nodded, words momentarily beyond her. Xavier slipped the ring onto her finger before rising to gather her in his arms, sealing their commitment with a kiss that held the promise of all the years to come. They were married that autumn in the small church in town, with Thomas Grayson beaming proudly as he gave his daughter away. The ceremony was attended by nearly everyone in the valley, many of whom had stood with them against Harlow and now celebrated the union that symbolized their community's renewal. As the years passed, Xavier and Tabitha worked side by side, transforming their combined properties into one of the most prosperous ranches in the territory. They built a new home on the ridge between their original homesteads, a place where they raised 3 children, 2 sons, and a daughter who grew up hearing the story of how their parents met during a raging storm at a collapsed bridge. Thomas Grayson lived to see his grandchildren reach adolescence, passing peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78. His legacy lived on in the land he had fought to preserve and in the family that continued his work. On their 20th anniversary, Xavier took Tabitha back to the rebuilt bridge over the Bonito River. Standing at the spot where he had pulled her from the raging waters, he wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if that bridge hadn't collapsed?" he asked softly. Tabitha turned in his embrace, her green eyes still as captivating as they had been that first night in his cabin. I think we would have found each other somehow. Some things are just meant to be. Xavier smiled, remembering the frightened, half-drowned woman he had carried from the river and the strength he had discovered within her. You know, I still remember exactly what I said when you opened your eyes that first time. You're safe now, madam, Tabitha quoted with a smile. And I have been ever since. As they stood together on the bridge, the sun setting behind the mountains just as it had that fateful day, Xavier reflected on how a moment of crisis had led to a lifetime of love. The flood that had nearly claimed Tabitha's life had instead washed away his isolation, bringing him to the shore of a new beginning neither could have imagined. I love you, Tabitha Vaughn, he whispered against her hair, using the name she had taken with pride 2 decades earlier. And I love you, Xavier Vaughn, she replied, leaning into his embrace as they watched the golden light fade from the valley that had become the heart of their shared world. Now and always.